Hey, welcome to the third video of this native advertising masterclass. Now, in these videos, I am sharing with you key insights from research on native advertising on news websites. And in the previous video, we talked about the importance of transparency for native advertising. And in this video, I want to look with you at another principle, and that is the importance of relevance. And with relevance, I mean making the content of a native advertisement as relevant as possible to the reader. Now, why is this so important? Well, as I previously told you, most of the research on native advertising has been revolved around the persuasion knowledge model. And although research shows that readers often become more critical and negative when they recognize an advertisement as such, readers do not always respond more critically. Now, we've already seen the positive effect of transparency, but there is another mechanism that also has an influence, and that is the extent to which conceptual persuasion knowledge leads to so-called attitudinal persuasion knowledge. Now, as I told you before, attitudinal persuasion knowledge is related to consumers' critical feelings towards an ad, such as skepticism, but also feelings of manipulation. And there are several studies that showed that there are different factors related to the content of a native ad, but also the context that can either increase or decrease this attitudinal persuasion knowledge and these critical feelings. And that subsequently has a large influence on readers' evaluations. Now, one of the factors that play a role is so-called brand presence. And brand presence is basically how often a brand mentions itself in the text. What you often see with advertisements, even native advertisements that take the form of a sponsored news article, is that the advertiser still often tries to promote itself. So you may remember those kind of articles, for instance, from a brand on your news website or in a magazine, in which, the brand writes a sort of editorial type article, but it still constantly links all the information to itself and its products. Like an article with tips for your smartphone, in which the smartphone brand mentions itself like 16 times. Now, this might have an influence on how readers respond towards native ads. Following previous research, what we expected in a study on the effect of brand presence is that readers will especially feel manipulated and evaluate an advertised brand negatively when a brand refers often to itself. Because in this case, readers feel that the brand mainly tries to benefit itself with the article, and that can lead to feelings of manipulation. Now, consumers don't want an advertiser to push them into a direction that only benefits the advertiser. But on the other hand, when the advertiser writes an article that is not really about the advertiser itself, but just about a topic that is of interest to the readers, it is likely that readers will feel less manipulated and subsequently respond more positively. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to test this. So we wanted to test the effect of brand presence in an experiment. Now, what you see here are two sponsored news articles from Samsung. And in one native ad, the advertiser Samsung was mentioned 6 times. And in the other native ad, Samsung was mentioned only 1 time. And furthermore, we kept the article as much the same as possible. And what we also did in the study was we retested the effect of disclosure position that you've learned about in the previous video. So following those American researchers, we also created 3 types of label conditions. And one native ad had the disclosure sponsored by Samsung on top of the page, the other one in the middle of the article, and we had one condition that combined 2 labels, one at the top and one at the at the middle of the article, and the label said like sponsored by Samsung. Now, what did the results show? Well, first of all, disclosure position indeed made a difference in line with the previous research. So when we had a label in the middle of the page, 22% of the readers recognized the ad as such, whereas when the label was positioned on top of the page, only 11% recognized the ads. And that was in line with previous research that I discussed so in the previous video. Furthermore, in our study, label recognition helped readers to recognize the native ad as such. However, this did not lead to higher attitudinal persuasion knowledge, or in this case, to more feelings of manipulation. And it also had no negative influence on how readers responded towards the advertisement, the brand, or the news website. High brand presence, on the other hand, well, that did lead to more feelings of manipulation. And readers who viewed the native ad, in which Samsung mentions itself very often, it's like 6 times, these readers also evaluated the native ad advertiser and news website more negatively. And that could be explained by those higher feelings of manipulation. So the results suggest that, well, as an advertiser, you cannot really talk often about yourself in the native ad. Then readers are still going to respond very critically. Now, if you are an advertiser, you may wonder, okay, if I cannot mention my own brand often in the text, how do I make sure then that the native ad does have an impact on my brand and not that readers simply they enjoy the information, but they don't really link it to me, or they even link it to a competitor? Well, as I just showed you, it does no harm when you mention your brand name in the label or when you add your logo to the label. So you can do a little bit of branding in the label itself, and to make sure that readers are still aware that the native ad is coming from you. Furthermore, other researchers also have found that adding a banner ad to the native ad also does no harm to the effectiveness of the native ad. So what this basically means is that for branding, you can actually add your brand's name to a native ad and even the logo if you want to, but you just shouldn't talk too much about yourself in the content. So make the content as native as possible. All right. Now, this is the last study that I'm going to discuss. And in this study, it's still related to relevance. I am going to look at 2 other factors that can potentially influence the extent to which readers' advertising recognition leads to more or less negative evaluations. And these 2 factors are message-sidedness and also source credibility. Now, what we often see, even for native advertisements, is that advertisements from advertisers are generally one-sided. And that means that they, for instance, only include positive information, or they only include negative information about an issue or a product or a service. And I think you all know these types of ads. So it is something like this one, 10 reasons to buy an electric car, or for instance, an article about the 5 benefits of buying organic beauty products. It only provides one-sided information that is often in the interest of the advertiser. Now, another example could be an article about all the advantages of the sweetener stevia. Now, you may think that providing as many reasons as possible for why something is great or why something is not so great, that will make the content very persuasive. You give a lot of arguments, like, okay, you need to do this for this and this reason. However, when we look at previous research, we actually expected that using this one-sided information for native ads, that this would actually increase the feelings of manipulation among readers. And that would maybe lead to more resistance. So readers might, for instance, try to think themselves of potential disadvantages of stevia when you only provide an article about the advantages. That is one of the resistance strategies that consumers often use. Well, and this resistance and these feelings of manipulation might subsequently result into actually more negative evaluations. On the other hand, following the attribution theory, we expected that when an advertiser provides a two-sided article, readers would actually be more likely to reason that the advertiser is really trying to provide genuine, honest information to really help the reader and not to push them into a certain direction. And subsequently, they may be more open and positive towards that native ad. So to test this, we compared a one-sided native ad with a two-sided native ad about, in this case, this example, so the sweetener stevia. So the one-sided native ad only provided advantages about the artificial sweetener stevia, and the two-sided native ad also provided some disadvantages. And we expected that when we would make the native ad two-sided, that readers' feelings of manipulation would decrease, and that would result in more positive evaluations. Furthermore, in this study, we also wanted to see if readers' evaluations of one-sided and two-sided native ads differ for more or less credible types of advertisers. Now, even though advertisers are generally perceived as less trustworthy than journalists, between advertisers there can of course also be a difference in credibility. For instance, due to differences in expertise and perceived trustworthiness, and that can be influenced by the type of advertiser. So this might be especially interesting for native ads because, when you provide an article, it often contains a lot of information. And when readers consider an advertiser to be, even though it's an advertiser, still to be an expert or to be trustworthy, they might consider this ad to be really valuable and subsequently feel less manipulated. We therefore selected for this study, based on a pretest, 3 advertisers that differed in credibility as an information provider about artificial sweeteners, such as stevia, as stevia was the topic of this native ad. And based on that pretest, we selected Coca-Cola as the low credibility profit advertiser. And we compared that with a news article as a benchmark. And in 2 different studies, 2 different types of high credibility advertisers, namely a profit organization, Weight Watchers, in the first study, and a non-profit organization in the second study. And we furthermore also expected that there would be an interaction effect, namely that using a two-sided message would have the most positive effect for the low credibility advertiser, because we expected that readers would be initially most critical to the native ads from the low credibility advertiser. So then a two-sided message might be the most helpful. All right, so what we did, we compared the one-sided and two-sided message from the several sources with each other in 2 experiments. And these were the results. So what we saw in both studies is that the native ad from the low credibility advertiser Coca-Cola was significantly more critically processed compared to the native ad from Diabetes Liga, but also the native ad from Weight Watchers, and then the news article. Thank God, people still trust the news more than messages from Coca-Cola. However, when we look at the high credibility advertisers, we saw that the native ad from Weight Watchers and also from Diabetes Liga, that both of these native ads were actually perceived to be just as credible as the news article. So it seems that native ads are great for organizations that already have some kind of authority, and they can really use the native ads to further strengthen their position and to show their expertise. However, there's also some good news for low credibility advertisers, or actually for all advertisers, because when advertisers provided a two-sided message, readers felt indeed less manipulated, and they subsequently also evaluated the native ad more positively. We did not find a difference in the strength of the effect. So the effect was just as strong for the different types of advertisers. Now, let's put our knowledge a little bit into practice. If we go back to the native ad with the 10 reasons to buy an electric car, if you have that knowledge now about message-sidedness and source credibility, how would you apply this knowledge to make sure that readers don't directly become more defensive or negative when they recognize that they are viewing an advertisement from you? Okay, you can pause the video, write some ideas for yourself. Well, these are just some of the ideas. So to apply the message-sidedness effect, you can rewrite the article in a way that, it doesn't directly push the readers into one direction. So to make sure that readers are more likely to trust you, and if you are not a credible source, you can maybe also quote some research or a well-known expert that supports the knowledge that you are sharing. Now, these are just some ideas. You might have created a different native ad. But the point what I want to make is that, as you can see, knowing your consumers and how they process advertisements can definitely help you to create better and also more effective advertisements. Now, just to finish this part, I want to stress that in practice, there are some advertisers that make use of the source credibility effect in a way that is sometimes questionable and maybe also a little bit unethical, or in my opinion, it's very unethical. But what they do is they know that they are not really a credible source, like Coca-Cola. So what these companies do is they hide between other sources. So you have, for instance, the Knowledge Center for Sugar and Nutrition, but this is actually supported by the Sugar Union and also by Coca-Cola. By presenting a native ad from the Knowledge Center of Sugar and Nutrition about sugar, people might think that they are really looking at content from an expert. And in this case, this knowledge center also has research, so-called scientific research, but again supported by these sugar companies about that sugar isn't that bad, etc. Now, I think that the average consumer will not really continue to click or think about who is behind the knowledge center of sugar and nutrition. So personally, if I would work at a news organization, I would not allow these kind of practices. But right now they are still happening, and that is of course because there's a lot of money involved with it. I'm definitely curious about what you think about these ads. To sum it up, what we can conclude is that high relevance can indeed decrease readers' feelings of manipulation, and also can increase readers' positive responses when they have become aware that they are viewing an ad. And I've already shown a few factors that can influence the perceived relevance for readers. But there are, of course, also many other studies that also show interesting factors, such as, for instance, readers' involvement with the topic of the advertisement, but also perceived information utility. Now, if you want to read more about those studies, you can check out the notes of this video to read more about this and to read those articles. All right, that was it for relevance. For now, I would like to invite you to go to the final video, and that is about the importance of focus.